Imagine a knight running into a medieval battle completely naked.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, right? He has no armor. He carries no shield. You would expect him to be the first casualty on the battlefield.
Definitely.
But, well, in the microscopic world of poultry science, the bacteria missing its biological armor is actually the most devastating, unstoppable enemy a farmer can face.
It really is.
Today, we are tracking down Mycoplasma. We are exploring how an organism missing basic body parts manages to, destroy farm profits worldwide.
Right. It's a biological paradox, really. I mean, we are dealing with an organism that is incredibly fragile on a laboratory table, yet it causes chronic, massive economic damage inside a commercial poultry house.
Yeah, it's wild.
To defeat it, well, we have to understand its unique biological machinery.
Exactly. And we are going to break down that machinery step by step. Now, this deep dive is specifically designed for you, the listener.
Yes.
We know you are a poultry professional. We also know you are actively practicing your English through a technique called shadowing.
Right. That means you listen to a phrase, and then you repeat it out loud.
Shadowing is a powerful tool for language acquisition. Mastering the technical vocabulary is, well, the absolute first step in mastering the science of poultry health.
You really need these exact words to communicate with veterinarians, farm managers, and, laboratory technicians.
So we have built a specific structure for our conversation today. As we analyze the science of Mycoplasma, we will introduce 10 critical technical terms.
Right, 10 terms.
When we reach a key term, we will slow down our speaking pace. We will explain the word using simple, clear English. We will repeat the word once.
And then we will use it in a practical farming example.
Finally, you will hear a short pause in the audio. We will explicitly say the word pause. During that silence, we want you to speak out loud.
Yeah, repeat the sentence you just heard. Focus on clear pronunciation. I mean, this builds both your cognitive understanding of the science and your mechanical ability to speak the professional language.
You don't have to worry about perfect grammar right now. Just listen to the concepts, understand the science, and, speak the vocabulary out loud.
Let's get right into the data.
Right. We have to start with the biology. Our sources identified 2 main culprits in the poultry industry. 2 specific strains cause the vast majority of the damage in chickens and turkeys.
Yeah, we are looking primarily at Mycoplasma gallisepticum. The industry abbreviates this as MG.
MG.
And the second strain is Mycoplasma synoviae. We abbreviate that as MS. Both are incredibly problematic, but, well, they behave differently in the field.
Looking at the epidemiological data, MG and MS have an inverse relationship. It's about how common they are versus how much damage they do.
Exactly.
The sources show MG has a low prevalence. That means it is relatively rare. You don't find it on every single farm.
Right. But it has high economic significance. When a flock catches MG, the financial destruction is absolute.
It's devastating.
MS presents the opposite scenario. MS has a very high prevalence. It is endemic in many poultry-producing regions globally.
So you find it constantly?
You do. However, it generally has a lower economic significance compared to MG. It causes problems, particularly with eggshell quality and joint issues, but it doesn't typically cause the catastrophic mortality rates we see with a severe MG outbreak.
So MG is the primary heavyweight fighter here.
Yeah.
We need to look closely at its physical structure.
We do.
You mentioned earlier that it's a biological paradox.
Well,
the sources state Mycoplasma has the smallest genome of any free-living organism.
yeah.
Its genetic code is incredibly short.
This is a crucial evolutionary point. A genome is, it's a set of instruction manuals.
Right.
Most bacteria have large instruction manuals. They know how to build amino acids. They know how to synthesize complex proteins.
But
Mycoplasma threw those manuals away. It discarded any genetic code that wasn't strictly necessary for basic survival.
Wow. It's an extreme minimalist.
Yeah.
Because it lacks the genetic instructions to make its own food, it has to steal nutrients directly from the host bird.
Exactly. But the most significant missing piece isn't a genetic instruction.
What is?
It's a physical body part. Mycoplasma does not have a cell wall.
This brings us back to my opening metaphor. The cell wall is the knight's armor.
Right, it's the armor.
For a standard bacterium like Salmonella or E. coli, The cell wall is a rigid, tough outer layer. It provides structural support.
It protects the delicate internal machinery from changing environmental pressures.
But Mycoplasma completely lacks this tough outer layer. It only has a thin, flexible plasma membrane.
Yeah, just a membrane.
This sounds like a terrible evolutionary strategy, to be honest. Without a cell wall, they dry out easily.
They really do.
The data shows they die quickly outside of a bird. Heat, sunlight, and basic disinfectants can destroy them almost instantly on a dry surface. They are incredibly vulnerable.
Well, that vulnerability exists when they are outside the bird. But once they get inside the bird's body, the lack of a cell wall suddenly becomes a massive advantage.
Wait, really? How?
It becomes a superpower against our primary medical weapons. Think about the most famous antibiotic in human history, penicillin.
Right. Penicillin revolutionized medicine, and the way penicillin works is highly specific. It attacks the bacterium's ability to build and repair its cell wall.
Exactly.
It chemically blocks the cross-linking of the peptidoglycan molecules that make up the armor.
Precisely. Penicillin targets the armor assembly line. If you give penicillin to a normal bacterium, well, its armor falls apart, it bursts open, and it dies.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Now apply that mechanism to Mycoplasma.
There is no cell wall. There is no armor assembly line. So the penicillin molecules just float right past it. The drug has absolutely no physical target to bind to.
The antibiotic is rendered entirely useless. And it's not just penicillin. Entire classes of antibiotics, like cephalosporins and beta-lactams, they rely on attacking the cell wall.
Wow.
Mycoplasma is naturally genetically immune to all of them. By missing a body part, they become invisible to some of our most powerful drugs.
That is a brilliant, frustrating biological adaptation.
Very frustrating.
This is the perfect moment for our first shadowing practice. We have two foundational scientific terms based on this biology. Listen closely and prepare to speak.
Our first technical term is pathogen. A pathogen is an organism that causes disease. Pathogen. Mycoplasma is a dangerous pathogen for chickens.
Pause. Let's move directly to the biological structure we just discussed.
The second term is cell wall. The cell wall is the tough outer layer of most bacteria. Cell wall. Penicillin does not work because Mycoplasma has no cell wall. Pause.
Excellent focus. Now, we have to connect this cellular biology to the practical reality of a working farm.
Right, the real-world application.
We established that Mycoplasma is highly fragile in the environment because it lacks a cell wall. It needs a warm, wet environment to survive.
It does.
This creates a logical puzzle. If it dies easily in the sun, well, how does it spread so successfully across international borders and infect thousands of farms?
The mechanism of transmission is fascinating. The bacteria must move quickly from a hostile environment into a safe harbor. When they enter a new bird, they immediately seek out mucosal surfaces.
Okay, let's define mucosal surfaces for the listener. These are the wet, mucus-lined inner tissues of the bird's body, the inside of the nostrils.
The lining of the windpipe, which is known as the trachea.
Right, the lungs and the delicate air sacs that help the bird breathe. These areas are warm, moist, and nutrient-rich.
They are the perfect oasis for a bacterium without a cell wall. Once they find the mucosal surface, they use a specialized tip structure to attach themselves firmly to the host cells.
They just anchor themselves in.
Exactly. From this safe location, they begin to multiply, and then they begin to spread to other birds.
The sources outline two distinct methods of spread. The first is horizontal transmission. This simply means the disease moves sideways through a population.
Sideways, yeah.
It moves from one living bird to another living bird in the same environment. This happens through direct and indirect contact.
Direct contact is straightforward. A sick bird sneezes, expelling thousands of bacteria in tiny water droplets.
And a healthy bird standing nearby breathes in those droplets. The pathogen has successfully jumped hosts.
But indirect contact is where farm management becomes incredibly difficult.
Yeah, indirect contact involves fomites. A fomite is an inanimate object that carries the disease. Now, we know Mycoplasma is fragile, but the source data provides specific survival times that are quite alarming for farm managers.
Very alarming.
For example, Mycoplasma can survive for up to 4 days on cotton or feathers.
4 days is an eternity in an active farming operation. Think about the implications. A worker walks through an infected barn. An infected feather brushes against their cotton uniform.
Oh, no.
The bacteria embed in the fabric. The worker finishes their shift, goes home, and comes back the next day. They walk into a clean, uninfected barn wearing the same unwashed cotton shirt.
They just delivered the pathogen directly to the healthy birds. The data also notes it can survive for 2 days on rubber.
Rubber boots.
Yeah, That means the soles of rubber work boots are a prime transportation vehicle. Interestingly, it survives for less than 4 hours in dry animal feed.
The lack of moisture in the feed dries out the cell membrane quickly. But the physical transport on boots and shirts is only half the problem of horizontal transmission.
What's the other half?
The real challenge is the incubation period. The epidemiology relies heavily on carrier birds. A carrier bird hosts the multiplying bacteria, but it does not look sick yet.
This is the silent shedding phase. According to the text, the incubation period, the time between the initial infection and the first visible signs of illness, ranges from 6 to 21 days.
Imagine a massive broiler house with 30,000 chickens. The density is incredibly high. They are sharing the same airspace, the same water lines, the same feed pans.
So a bird catches the pathogen on day 1.
Right, and it spends the next 3 weeks walking around, eating, drinking, and exhaling mycoplasma into the air.
The farmer looks at the flock every day and thinks everything is perfectly healthy. By the time the first chicken actually starts coughing on day 21, well, the pathogen has already silently spread to thousands of other birds.
The high density accelerates the infection rate exponentially. That is horizontal transmission. It is aggressive and stealthy.
Yeah, it really is.
But the second method of spread is arguably more destructive to the global poultry industry. That is vertical transmission.
Vertical transmission moves down the family tree. It travels directly from the mother hen into her offspring.
If a breeding hen is infected with MG, the bacteria circulate in her bloodstream. They can colonize her reproductive tract, specifically the oviduct.
So as she produces an egg, the bacteria physically enter the yolk or the albumen before the hard calcium shell is even formed around it.
The hen lays the egg. On the outside, it looks like a perfect, clean, healthy hatching egg. It gets packed onto a truck and shipped to a commercial hatchery.
It goes into a warm incubator for 21 days. But inside that shell, the pathogen is multiplying right alongside the developing embryo.
When that chick hatches, it takes its very first breath of air. But it is already infected. It is shedding mycoplasma from minute 1.
That is brutal.
You can buy a shipment of 10,000 day-old chicks from a reputable supplier, place them in a brand new, sanitized barn, and introduce a devastating disease on your very first day of operations.
The sources note that the rate of vertical transmission varies. It is highest during the acute phase of the hen's infection when the bacteria levels in her blood are spiking.
Right.
This dual-threat transmission model, sneaking horizontally across equipment and vertically through the egg, makes eradication incredibly complex. Let's practice the vocabulary for these two transmission pathways.
Our third term is horizontal transmission. Horizontal transmission happens when healthy birds touch infected feathers. Pause.
Now for the downward spread.
The fourth term is vertical transmission. This means spreading disease from a mother hen to her egg. Vertical transmission. Vertical transmission means the chick is born already infected. Pause.
You are doing great. Keep projecting your voice clearly. Because those carrier birds look perfectly healthy while silently shedding the bacteria into the air, the farmer often has no idea the clock is ticking.
They really don't.
By the time the farmer actually sees a physical problem, the biology has shifted. The bacteria have established a massive population in the respiratory tract. What is happening inside the bird's body during this shift?
The clinical condition caused by MG is called CRD, which stands for chronic respiratory disease.
CRD.
The word chronic is vital here. This is not a virus like highly pathogenic avian influenza, which can kill a flock in 48 hours. CRD is a slow, grinding decline.
The sources outline a very specific progression of clinical signs. It starts with the upper respiratory tract.
Right.
A farmer doing their daily walkthrough might notice conjunctivitis first. The tissues around the bird's eyes become inflamed, red, and swollen. The eyes water heavily, a condition called lacrimation.
The birds look like they're crying. Shortly after, you see nasal discharge. A sticky mucoid fluid begins leaking from the nostrils.
The birds frequently shake their heads to try and clear the sticky fluid from their nasal passages.
Yeah, and as the bacteria move deeper down the windpipe, you start to hear respiratory rails.
A respiratory rail is a very specific, troubling sound. The trachea, the main breathing tube, normally has a smooth flow of air.
But MG causes the trachea to fill with thick mucus and inflammatory cells. When the bird breathes, the air forces its way through this sticky fluid. It creates a wet, clicking, rattling noise.
Oh man, if you stand quietly in the center of an infected poultry house, turn off the ventilation fans for just a moment and simply listen, you will hear a chorus of clicking and rattling sounds.
It's a terrible sound. Following the rails, the birds begin coughing. Finally, in advanced cases, you see severe swelling of the facial skin and the eyelids.
The sinuses packed tightly with hard, cheesy pus. The bird is suffering tremendously.
This suffering translates directly into economic devastation. The sources provide hard data on the financial toll. It is helpful to divide these into direct losses and indirect losses.
Let's analyze a hypothetical flock of 30,000 birds using the statistics from Cleveland in 1990. The direct losses start before the bird even hatches.
The data indicates a 5 to 20% embryo mortality rate. Because the pathogen is inside the egg via vertical transmission, the developing chick is overwhelmed.
So if 20% of the embryos die in the incubator, our farmer has already lost 6,000 potential chickens before day one.
And the losses continue after hatching. The sources cite a 5 to 10% chick mortality rate in the first few weeks of life. The young birds are too weak to compete for food and water. They succumb to the infection.
But the most insidious direct loss is the 8 to 25% rate of slow growth.
This is where the farm bleeds money. In commercial poultry, well, time is money. A modern broiler chicken is genetically designed to reach market weight in a very specific number of days, usually around 35 to 42 days.
Right, and every day a bird stays on the farm, it eats expensive feed.
If the bird has CRD, its body is using all its energy to fight the infection instead of building muscle. It grows slowly.
It requires more days on the farm and significantly more feed to reach the target weight. This destroys the farm's feed conversion ratio.
And if the farm is raising laying hens instead of meat birds, the direct losses shift to the egg output. The data shows an 8 to 20% decrease in egg production.
A hen with a severe respiratory infection just stops ovulating. The farm's daily output drops drastically, completely disrupting their supply contracts with supermarkets.
Exactly.
So we're looking at dead embryos, dead chicks, stunted growth, and missing eggs. That sounds catastrophic on its own.
It does.
But looking closely at the data, the direct losses are actually just the tip of the iceberg. The indirect losses are far more financially ruinous.
The indirect losses are driven by secondary infections. Mycoplasma is terrible, but it is often just the door opener for something worse. To understand this, we need to look at the cellular lining of the chicken's trachea.
The inside of the windpipe is lined with tiny, hair-like structures called cilia. These cilia constantly beat back and forth like piney brooms.
Right, their job is to sweep dust, debris, and inhaled bacteria up and out of the lungs. It's a natural physical defense mechanism.
When mycoplasma attaches to the mucosal surface, it releases metabolic byproducts like hydrogen peroxide that severely damage the host cells.
The bacteria literally paralyze and destroy the sweeting cilia. The brooms stop working. The respiratory clearance mechanism fails completely.
And that clears the path for opportunistic invaders. The environment in a poultry house is full of common bacteria, particularly Escherichia coli or E. coli.
Normally, a healthy bird's cilia sweep the E. coli away, but an MG-infected bird has no defense.
The E. coli marches right down the trachea, deep into the lungs and air sacs, and enters the bloodstream.
This synergy between MG and E. coli creates a massive systemic infection. The bird's internal organs become covered in a thick, fibrous layer of pus. It affects the heart, a condition called pericarditis. It affects the liver, called perihepatitis.
Which brings us to the processing plant. When the farmer finally loads these slow-growing birds onto trucks and sends them to slaughter, they face the final, crushing indirect loss.
Right. Government food safety inspectors examine every single carcass on the processing line.
When the inspector opens a bird and sees pericarditis and perihepatitis, they immediately flag it. The meat is condemned.
Condemnation means the entire carcass is thrown into a rendering bin. It cannot be sold for human consumption.
The farmer spent 6 weeks feeding and caring for that bird, and the final payout is $0.
Even if the bird isn't totally condemned, there is downgrading. The meat quality is poor, the carcass might be smaller or have minor blemishes.
It gets downgraded from a premium whole bird to lower-priced cut parts. And throughout this entire process, the farmer has likely been spending thousands of dollars on elevated medication costs trying to salvage the flock.
It's an economic death spiral. Dead embryos, stunted growth, wasted feed, expensive drugs, and massive condemnations at the slaughterhouse. All triggered by a bacterium with no cell wall.
This highlights 2 very important economic and management terms for our shadowing practice. Let's practice. Focus on clarity.
Our 5th term is flock. A flock is a group of poultry kept together. Flock. The farmer checks the flock for coughing birds. Pause.
Now for the metric that determines a farm's profitability.
The sixth term is feed conversion. This is how well a bird turns its food into body weight. Good feed conversion means less food is wasted. Feed conversion. Sick birds have poor feed conversion and cost more money to feed. Pause.
Excellent. Take a breath. We understand the biology, we see the clinical signs and the financial ruin. But here is the major problem for a farm manager. The clinical signs of MG, the red eyes, the coughing, the nasal discharge, look exactly like several other avian diseases.
They really do. A virus like infectious bronchitis or Newcastle disease causes identical symptoms.
You cannot diagnose mycoplasma simply by looking at a coughing chicken. Guessing the cause based on clinical signs is a recipe for disaster.
If you guess it's a bacterial infection and spend $20,000 on antibiotics, but it's actually a viral infection, you just wasted your money. Antibiotics do not kill viruses.
You must have scientific proof. You must play detective. The farmer has to rely on rigorous diagnostics. According to the sources, the isolation and identification of the bacteria usually happen 4 to 8 weeks post-infection. Why does it take a month or two?
We are looking at the acute stage of the disease when the immune system is actively fighting the pathogen. To find the bacteria, veterinarians take physical samples from the mucosal surfaces we discussed earlier.
They perform necropsies on a few sick birds and harvest tissue from the trachea, the air sacs, or the lungs.
On live birds, they use specialized swabs. They insert a sterile cotton swab deep into the trachea.
Or they swab the choanal cleft, which is a specific slit in the roof of the bird's mouth that connects to the nasal passages.
Culturing mycoplasma from these swabs is notoriously difficult. Because they lack a cell wall, they are fragile in transport. They require highly specialized, expensive agar plates to grow in a lab, and they grow incredibly slowly.
It can take weeks to see a tiny, fried egg-shaped colony on a Petri dish.
Weeks is too long for a farmer losing hundreds of birds a day. They need faster answers.
That is why the industry relies heavily on blood testing. The scientific term for blood testing is serology. Serology does not look for the bacteria itself.
No, it looks for the bird's immune response to the bacteria.
When a bird is exposed to MG, its immune system produces specific antibodies designed to fight that exact pathogen. These antibodies float in the blood serum.
By testing the serum, we can tell if the bird has been exposed.
Yeah.
The sources outline 3 primary serological tests.
The oldest and most common field test is SPA. That stands for serum plate agglutination. It is widely used for broad screening of large flocks because it is incredibly quick and very cheap.
You could literally do it on the farm.
The mechanism of SPA is quite visual. You take a glass plate, you place 1 drop of the bird's blood serum on the glass.
Then you add 1 drop of the SPA antigen, which is essentially a liquid filled with dead mycoplasma cells dyed blue or purple. You mix the 2 drops together.
If the bird has antibodies against mycoplasma in its serum, those antibodies will physically grab onto the dead cells in the antigen fluid. They link together.
Within seconds, you can see the liquid clump up into tiny blue granules on the glass. That clumping is called agglutination.
It's a fast, visual positive. However, SPA has a major flaw. It is highly sensitive, but it yields false positives.
The test will sometimes clump up and say the bird has MG, even when the bird is completely healthy.
Why does a false positive happen? If it's a chemical reaction, why does it lie?
It happens because of cross-reaction. Early in an infection, the bird produces a large, generic type of antibody called IgM. IgM is sticky.
Ah, sticky antibodies.
If the bird recently received a completely different vaccine, or if it is infected with a harmless related strain of mycoplasma, the sticky IgM might accidentally grab the SPA antigen and cause clumping. The test is too sensitive for its own good.
If a farmer tests 50 birds and gets 10 positive SPA results, they cannot immediately assume the worst. They might panic over a false alarm.
They must confirm the results with a secondary test. The sources cite the HI test for this purpose.
HI stands for heme agglutination inhibition. It is much more specific than SPA. It rarely gives false positives.
If the HI test is positive, the flock definitely has the disease. But HI is a complex laboratory procedure.
It requires highly trained technicians, fresh red blood cells, and it is very time-consuming. It is a slow confirmation tool.
But looking at modern commercial operations and the source data, many have moved heavily toward ELISA testing.
ELISA stands for Enzyme-Linked Immunosortin Assay. It seems to hit the sweet spot between speed, cost, and accuracy.
ELISA is the backbone of modern flock monitoring. It is less sensitive than SPA, meaning it misses very early day 1 infections, but it is much more specific. ELISA specifically looks for EGG antibodies. EG is the long-term memory antibody.
So ELISA tells you the historical status of the flock. If you test a flock of 30,000 birds using ELISA, and a large percentage show high IgG levels, you know definitively that the flock was exposed to the pathogen weeks ago and survived.
It is an excellent tool for mapping the long-term health trends of a farm.
However, serology SPA, HI, and ELISA only tells you about antibodies. It tells you the bird's immune system reacted to something.
But what if you want to find the exact physical DNA of the pathogen causing the coughing today?
For that, we leave serology behind and move to molecular testing. The gold standard mentioned in the sources is PCR, or polymerase chain reaction.
PCR is a technological marvel. Instead of looking for antibodies in the blood, PCR takes the swab from the bird's trachea and searches directly for the genetic code of Mycoplasma gallisepticum.
The machine uses thermal cycling heating and cooling the sample rapidly. If it finds even a tiny fragment of mgDNA, the chemical reaction copies it. It doubles it. Then it doubles it again.
30 cycles later, it has amplified that single strand of DNA into 1 billion copies, making it easily readable by the computer.
The sources highlight that PCR is rapid, delivering results in 24 to 36 hours, and it is incredibly sensitive. Theoretically, the reaction only requires one single organism, one solitary mycoplasma cell on the swab, to detect its DNA and confirm the infection.
This brings up a critical question regarding farm management. If PCR is so incredibly fast and so mathematically accurate that it can find a single organism, why do we even bother with the older, cheaper blood tests like SPA or ELISA? Why not run PCR on every bird?
It comes down to the economic realities of scale. PCR is highly specific, but it is expensive on a per-test basis. A commercial poultry house holds tens of thousands of birds.
You cannot afford to run a $30 PCR test on every single chicken.
It would bankrupt the farm before the disease did.
Exactly. Serology and PCR serve entirely different purposes. SPA and ELISA are broad surveillance tools. You bleed 50 birds to get a cheap statistical overview of the entire 30,000 bird flock.
You use serology to monitor the historical baseline.
You only deploy PCR as a targeted sniper rifle. If a few birds start coughing, you swab those specific 5 birds and run PCR to identify the exact enemy in the present moment.
ELISA tells you the history. PCR tells you the present moment. Let's practice the vocabulary associated with diagnosing and preventing disease.
Our 7th term is serology. This means testing blood serum for antibodies. Serology. We use serology to see if the flock was exposed to the disease. Pause.
And once we know the disease is out there, we have to protect the borders of the farm.
The 8th term is biosecurity. Biosecurity means strict rules to prevent disease from entering a farm. Biosecurity. Changing your rubber boots is good biosecurity. Pause.
Great job. The diagnostics are complete. The SPA test clumped. The ELISA showed rising IgG levels. The PCR confirmed the exact DNA sequence. The laboratory calls the farm manager with the bad news. The flock officially has a severe Mycoplasma gallisepticum infection.
The farm must act immediately.
The gold standard response, the ideal scenario, is always eradication. Eradication means completely eliminating the pathogen from the premises.
In many professional breeding operations, if a flock tests positive for MG, the entire flock is immediately depopulated. They are euthanized. The barn is washed, heavily disinfected, left empty for weeks to break the cycle, and then restarted with brand new chicks.
But depopulating 30,000 birds is a massive financial loss. Not every farm can afford to burn the house down to kill a spider.
If eradication is economically impossible, the farm shifts from elimination to management. They must turn to medication. They must learn to live with mycoplasma.
Fighting back with medication requires precision. Let's analyze a specific treatment protocol detailed in our source documents. We have the technical label for a pharmaceutical product called Denagard 80% coated.
Denagard is a feed premix. It's a fine powder designed to be mixed directly into the bird's daily feed rations. The active chemical ingredient in this medicine is tiamulin hydrogen fumarate, which makes up 80% of the product by weight.
Tiamulin is a highly effective antibiotic for this specific pathogen. Earlier, we noted that penicillin fails because Mycoplasma has no cell wall. Tiamulin attacks a completely different cellular target.
It enters the bacterium and binds to its ribosomes, the tiny factories that synthesize proteins. It jams the machinery. The bacterium cannot produce proteins, so it stops multiplying and eventually dies.
The label is very explicit about its legal indication. It is indicated specifically for the treatment of chronic respiratory disease, or CRD, in broiler chickens, laying hens, and breeding hens. But we must be very clear about what the word treatment means in this context. Does tiamulin cure the flock?
No. It is vital to understand this distinction. The medication reduces the clinical signs. The coughing stops. The feed conversion improves. The mortality rate drops. The farm stops hemorrhaging money. But the drug will not eliminate the infection completely.
The pathogen hides deep in the tissues. The birds will remain lifelong carriers.
It's like putting a heavy lid on a boiling pot of water. The medication is the lid. It keeps the water from spilling over the edges and making a massive mess. It controls the chaos.
But the fire is still burning underneath. The water is still boiling. The moment you remove the lid, the moment you stop feeding the antibiotic, the disease can easily boil over again.
The medication buys the farmer time. Let's look at the dosage administration. Precision is critical because underdosing leads to resistance and overdosing leads to toxicity.
The label dictates mixing the powder into the bulk animal feed at the feed mill. To treat a clinical outbreak of CRD in chickens, the mill must add 250 to 625 grams of Denagard powder into every single ton of feed.
A ton is 2,000 pounds of food. The drug is heavily diluted.
The duration of the treatment plan depends entirely on the production type of the bird. For broilers, the chickens raised rapidly for meat, you must administer the medicated feed continuously for 14 consecutive days.
For layers producing table eggs and breeders producing hatching eggs, the administration window is shortened to 7 consecutive days.
But administering pharmaceuticals on a farm is dangerous work. The label includes a massive section on contraindications. These are strict warnings about what farm managers must absolutely avoid doing.
The primary danger is drug interaction. Poultry feed often contains other routine medications, particularly ionophores used to control intestinal parasites called coccidia. The Denagard label states clearly, animals must not receive products containing certain ionophore drugs while taking tiamulin.
The list of forbidden interacting drugs includes lacilocid, monensin, narracin, salinomycin, and cimderamycin. What actually happens biologically if a feed mill makes a mistake and accidentally mixes salinomycin into the same batch of feed as the tiamulin?
It triggers severe fatal toxicity. The tiamulin inhibits the bird's liver from metabolizing the salinomycin. The salinomycin builds up to toxic levels in the bird's bloodstream.
Oh, wow.
It causes rapid muscle paralysis. The birds lose the ability to walk, their legs extend backward, and they quickly die. The farmer must enforce a strict, clean window of at least 7 days before and after using Denagard, where those other drugs are totally banned from the feed lines.
The warnings extend to human safety as well. The tiamulin powder is a concentrated chemical. The label warns that it is highly irritating to human eyes and the respiratory system. The feed mill worker mixing the product must not inhale the dust.
They are required to wear suitable protective clothing, goggles, and respiratory gloves.
And crucially, the label explicitly warns in bold text, do not feed undiluted. It must be homogeneously mixed into a full ton of feed. If a bird eats a clump of pure undiluted powder, it will suffer acute toxicity.
Beyond the immediate toxicity, the broader scientific community constantly warns about the long-term dangers of antibiotic usage. If a farm manages Mycoplasma purely by pumping tiamulin into the feed every single month, what is the evolutionary result?
The bacteria adapt. This is the crisis of antibiotic resistance. If you constantly expose a massive population of bacteria to a drug, but don't eradicate every single cell, the few surviving cells learn to tolerate the chemical.
They pass that resistance to their offspring.
Yeah.
Eventually, you create a super strain of Mycoplasma that is completely immune to tiamulin. When that happens, you lose your best weapon entirely.
Furthermore, we have a legal and ethical obligation to the human consumer. The end product is food on a supermarket shelf. There are strict government regulations regarding chemical residues in human food.
You cannot simply feed a chicken a powerful antibiotic on Monday and slaughter it for human consumption on Tuesday.
The tissue must be clean. The bird's liver and kidneys need time to process the drug and flush it completely out of the muscle tissue. The label lists mandatory legal waiting times. For instance, Denagard is also utilized in swine production. A farmer is legally prohibited from slaughtering treated pigs within 7 days of the final dose.
And the rules are equally strict for poultry. The label states that chickens must not be slaughtered for human consumption while they're actively receiving the treatment.
Furthermore, the farmer must enforce a strict waiting period. They must not slaughter the birds within 2 days of finishing the medication.
The farmer must wait a minimum of 48 full hours after the bird swallows its final bite of medicated feed before that bird can legally enter the processing plant. This guarantees the meat is pure, safe, and free of any pharmacological residue. This legal waiting window is our next vocabulary practice.
Prepare to shadow. This is a critical regulatory term.
Our ninth term is withdrawal period. This is the time you must wait after giving medicine before selling the meat or eggs. Withdrawal period. The withdrawal period for this medicine in chickens is 2 days. Pause.
Fantastic focus. We have one final strategic topic to cover. We established that medication like Tiamulin treats the problem after the disaster has already started. It puts a lid on the boiling pot.
But wouldn't it be infinitely more profitable to prevent the pot from ever getting hot in the first place?
Proactive prevention is always superior to reactive treatment. Shielding the birds with a robust vaccination program is a primary strategy for farms forced to live in Mycoplasma endemic areas.
The goal of vaccination is multifold. The sources state that a successful vaccine program prevents the onset of clinical disease. It stops the severe coughing and the secondary E. coli infections. It protects the farm's profit by reducing the egg production losses.
But most critically, it drastically reduces vertical transmission. It creates an immunological barrier that stops the mother hen from passing the bacteria down into the hatching egg.
There are two fundamentally different scientific approaches to vaccination in poultry. The first approach utilizes a live vaccine. An example referenced in the literature is AviPro-MGF. The F stands for the specific F strain of the bacteria.
A live vaccine means you are literally putting living Mycoplasma bacteria into a bottle and intentionally giving it to your flock. Why would a farmer purposely infect their own birds?
Because the vaccine strain is highly attenuated. It is a mild, weakened version of the pathogen. It is strong enough to trigger an immune response, but too weak to cause severe CRD.
You typically administer this live vaccine to the pullets, the young female chickens, long before they reach maturity and begin laying eggs.
You expose them while they are young and strong. Let's look at the cellular mechanism. How does the mild vaccine physically protect the bird against the dangerous field strain?
It relies on a principle called competitive exclusion. Think back to our discussion on mucosal surfaces. The inner lining of the trachea has thousands of microscopic receptor sites. The bacteria must bind to these sites to survive.
It's like a massive theater with thousands of seats. The live vaccine strain rushes into the trachea and occupies every single empty seat in the theater. It binds to all the receptor sites.
Yes, and it establishes a permanent mild colony. Weeks later, when the highly virulent, dangerous field strain of Mycoplasma blows into the bond on a particle of dust, it enters the trachea looking for a place to attach.
But the theater is completely sold out. The vaccine strain is already sitting in all the seats. The dangerous field strain physically has nowhere to attach. It gets swept away by the cilia.
The live vaccine displaces the virulent field strains at a cellular level, while simultaneously training the bird's immune system to produce antibodies.
It is an elegant, highly effective biological shield. However, handling live vaccines is risky. If the mild vaccine strain accidentally spreads to a neighboring farm that raises highly sensitive turkeys, you can cause severe disease in the turkeys.
Because of that risk, the sources detail a second completely different vaccination approach. The alternative is a killed vaccine.
The scientific term for a killed bacterial vaccine is a bacterin. In a bacterin, the mycoplasma cells are grown in a massive laboratory vat and then chemically murdered. They are completely dead. They cannot reproduce, they cannot cause disease, they are biologically inert.
If they are dead and inert, how do they train the immune system? The immune system might just ignore them as harmless debris.
To force the immune system to care, scientists mix the dead bacteria with a heavy oil emulsion. The oil acts as an adjuvant. When you inject this oily mixture into the bird, the oil traps the dead bacteria in a localized pocket of tissue.
This creates what immunologists call a depot effect. Instead of the dead bacteria washing away quickly, the thick oil slowly leaks the dead cells into the bloodstream over several weeks.
It constantly irritates the immune system, forcing it to mount a massive, prolonged antibody response.
The result is a highly elevated level of protective antibodies circulating in the blood. If we compare the two strategies, the live theater seat blocker versus the dead oil emulsion, there is a complex trade-off for the farm manager. Why would a farmer choose the expensive dead bacterin?
The primary advantage of the bacterin is absolute biological safety. Because the organisms are dead, you introduce zero live mycoplasma to your farm environment. There is zero risk of the vaccine strain mutating. There is zero risk of it accidentally blowing across the road and infecting your neighbor's turkey farm.
Furthermore, the clinical data supports its efficacy. The sources confirm that MG bacterins provide excellent protection for the farm's profit metrics. They successfully maintain normal egg production levels, preserve egg size, and protect the feed conversion ratio even when the farm is challenged by a live field strain.
That sounds like the perfect solution, safe and profitable. But looking closely at the analysis, the cons of using a Bactrin are severe logistical nightmares. First, it only prevents the clinical disease. The high antibody levels stop the bird from getting sick, but they don't block the feeder seeds. A vaccinated bird might still get infected by the field strain and become a silent carrier.
The logistics of administration are the second major hurdle. Live vaccines are easy. You can mix the live bacteria into the farm's drinking water system, or use massive aerosol sprayers to mist it into the air. You can vaccinate 30,000 birds in a few hours with minimal stress.
But a Bactrin is a big oil emulsion. You cannot put oil in the drinking water. It must be physically injected via a needle directly into the breast muscle or the subcutaneous tissue of the neck of every single individual bird.
Imagine the labor cost. The farmer has to hire a large, specialized crew. They have to physically catch, hold, inject, and release 30,000 terrified chickens. It takes days. It is incredibly labor-intensive and financially expensive.
Furthermore, injecting heavy oil into muscle tissue often causes localized swelling and painful tissue reactions.
And beyond the labor cost, the Bactrin creates a massive blind spot for the farm's diagnostic team. We discussed earlier how important serology, the ESPA, and ELISA tests is for monitoring flock health.
This is the critical flaw of the Bactrin. The entire purpose of the oil emulsion is to force the bird to produce massive amounts of antibodies against MG. When the veterinarian pulls blood a month later and runs a routine ELISA test, the entire flock will test heavily serologically positive.
The test plate will light up like a Christmas tree.
But the test only detects the presence of antibodies. It cannot tell the difference between antibodies created by the safe, dead vaccine and antibodies created because a dangerous live field strain just snuck into the barn.
Exactly. The scientific term for this problem is the lack of DIVA capability differentiating infected from vaccinated animals. By using the Bactrin, the farmer completely ruins their ability to use cheap, routine blood tests to monitor the actual health status of the farm.
They are flying blind. They must rely solely on expensive PCR testing to know what is really happening.
Farming is an endless series of difficult, high-stakes compromises. It is a constant balancing act between biological risk, labor costs, and diagnostic clarity. Let's lock in our final vocabulary word regarding this complex strategy.
Our 10th and final technical term is Bactrin. A Bactrin is a vaccine made from killed bacteria. Bactrin. The farmer injected a Bactrin to protect the birds safely. Pause.
You did it. That is all 10 professional vocabulary terms. As we synthesize everything we've learned and wrap up this deep dive, I want to pose one final provocative question based on a subtle detail in the source text.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground. We analyzed how a fragile bacterium without a cell wall outsmarts penicillin. We tracked its horizontal spread on cotton shirts and rubber boots, and its devastating vertical spread through the embryonic yolk sac.
We mapped the economic cascade from feed conversion loss to slaughterhouse condemnation, but there's one more hiding place we must address.
The research notes briefly, almost as an aside, that Mycoplasma possesses the biological ability to form biofilms. For the farm manager who thinks they have scrubbed their barn perfectly clean, this is a terrifying concept.
A biofilm is an architectural marvel of the bacterial world. It is not just a loose pile of cells. When certain bacteria, including Mycoplasma, gather in high density on a surface, they corroborate. They secrete a thick, slimy matrix of extracellular polymeric substances, essentially a highly resilient biological glue.
This glue covers the entire bacterial colony like a heavy protective blanket. Once they are encased in the biofilm, their vulnerability vanishes. The biofilm shields the fragile, cell wall-less bacteria from drying out. More importantly, it creates a physical and chemical barrier against standard farm disinfectants.
Consider the massive network of plastic water lines running through a commercial poultry house. These long pipes deliver drinking water to thousands of birds. The water flow is slow. The temperature inside the barn is consistently warm. It is the perfect incubator.
If a biofilm forms on the inner wall of that plastic pipe, the farm manager has a nearly invisible crisis. The manager might use high-pressure hoses and bleach to sanitize the floors, the walls, and the rubber boots. They might think the biosecurity is perfect.
But inside the pipes, safely shielded within layers of slimy matrix, the Mycoplasma is surviving the bleach flesh. As the fresh water flows over the biofilm, microscopic pieces of the colony break off and flow directly into the drinking nipples.
The very water system designed to keep the flock hydrated and healthy is secretly serving as an unkillable reservoir, constantly reinfecting the birds daily.
It forces us to ask how much of our persistent, recurring CRD outbreaks are actually driven by biofilms hiding in our infrastructure.
It is a provocative question that sits at the cutting edge of modern farm hygiene. It proves that mechanical cleaning is just as important as chemical cleaning. You must physically scrub the inside of the pipes to break the slime layer before the chemicals can work.
Yeah.
The invisible enemy is always adapting, and our understanding of its biology must continually adapt as well.
The complexity is staggering. Well, my friend, we have reached the end of an intense scientific journey. First, I want to thank our expert for providing such deep mechanical clarity on these complex biological and economic systems.
It has been my absolute pleasure. Peeling back the layers of poultry pathology reveals an endlessly fascinating biological chess match.
And most importantly, I want to congratulate you, the listener. You have engaged with highly complex scientific concepts, and you have successfully completed a rigorous English shadowing practice. You are actively building the precise professional vocabulary required for a successful career in international poultry science.
Cognitive repetition is the biological key to memory retention. Just as the immune system builds memory through IgG antibodies, your brain builds linguistic memory through physical repetition. It is how you transform external concepts into your own natural speech.
To help you permanently lock these 10 critical terms into your linguistic memory, we are going to conclude with a rapid-fire recap. I will slowly enunciate the 10 core vocabulary words one final time. I will leave a brief, distinct pause after each word. No definitions this time. Simply focus on your pronunciation and echo the word out loud into the room. Let's finish this a deep dive strong. Pathogen, pause. Cell wall, pause. Horizontal transmission, pause. Vertical transmission, pause. Flock, pause. Feed conversion, pause. Serology, pause. Biosecurity, pause. Withdrawal, period, pause. Bacterin, pause. Outstanding work today. Remember, the world of agricultural science is massive and incredibly complex, but you conquer it one concept and one word at a time. Keep learning the science, keep asking the difficult questions, and keep practicing your vocal shadowing. We will see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Goodbye, everyone. Keep up the good work.